so welcome to everyone, and again, for those, Richard, I just press this middle button, I guess? Yes?
No, right hand button.
The right-hand button, okay. So, I'd like to, I need my piece of paper as well. Okay, introducing our panel tonight. To my right here, I have Henry Jennings from Marcus Today. Henry has been involved in the finance industry for a long, long time. London trading derivatives and moving to Australia in 1989. Henry eventually settled at Macquarie Group, rising to become a divisional director responsible for equity trading in Australia. For the last decade, Henry has been involved in private broking, running a small team and working for a number of different brokers. Henry regularly appears on ABC TV and recently Your Money until their demise, and is a market commentator and strategist for Marcus Today. He's also most recently presented for AIA at the Gold Coast. He holds a BA in Media and Communications, International Relations, and was previously a member of the London Stock Exchange. Please welcome Henry Jennings. And to Henry's right, we have Ashley Owen, Chief Investment Officer for Stanford Brown. In a career spanning 34 years, he's held several senior executive roles in Citigroup, HSBC, ANZ Bank, where he's responsible for a variety of roles across marketing, financial control, strategic planning, and the list goes on. For the last 15 years, he's focused mainly on investment markets and has developed a proven, fact-based approach to managing long-term investment portfolios. His focus is portfolio management on risk management and downside protection. Prior to joining Stanford Brown, he spent 5 years advising and managing $4 billion in client portfolios for a major independent Australian advisory group. He holds degrees in economic history, law and finance, and is a CFA charter holder. He's a member of the Education Advisory Board, working committee for the CFA Institute in the US. He's written 3 books on finance and investing for Wiley. Please welcome Ashley Owen. And so just to let you know, the panel discussion is being recorded tonight. It'll be on YouTube. We also have a community radio show that goes to air every Tuesday morning at 8 a.m. On those particular frequencies, they have beacons out at Terry Hills and another one out at name escapes me right now. But for those of you on the northern beaches, you can tune in to those frequencies at 8 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. It's also streamed and also available on podcast on Whooshka, and I'll also be making these recordings available to the AIA, and they'll be posted on the website, and we'll advise through the normal channels when that becomes available. So, the focus of tonight's presentation and panel discussion, and our esteemed gentleman here, is we want to talk about the year that's been and what, in the eyes of these long-time finance people, is what we're going to be looking forward to in 2020. Now, this is the equity graph for the All Ords for 2019. It's been a pretty good year. So I'll now turn to my panel. Henry, were there any surprises in this number now that you think back on the year that's just been?
I don't know about surprises. I guess it's been surprising how strong it has been, given the volatility that we've seen this year, and also the fact that we've had one extreme headwind that emerged in February when the Royal Commission reported, and since then the financial services sector, or the banks in particular, have been under some pressure, and being a large part of the index, it's been remarkable, and it attests to, I guess, CSL. Part of that reason is that the index has done so well with such a big drag from banks. So it's been a pretty good year this year. I have to say it's had some ups and downs, and we're not at December the 31st yet, and there's still potential for more ups and downs even in the next week. So, but generally, it's been a pretty good year for investors, as long as you didn't pick Speedcast.
For our viewers and listeners, that's the person that won the wooden spoon this year, so for the guessing competition. And Ashley, what's your view of the year that's just been? Any surprises there, or did you really see that this was a foregone conclusion that we were going to hit this kind of number?
First of all, may I say just to the audience, Peter made a mistake. He said he's the wrong side of 60. I'm on the wrong side of 60 as well, and most of us are, so I'd like to move that that's actually the right side of 60. A seconder? Yes. No, it's now the right side of 60, thanks. For those of us that are over 60. No, it's been a good year. The whole world has been good. We've had the Fed changing its mind in January this year, so they changed from 4 rate hikes last year to rate cuts this year. That was a real key that started the whole thing. It's all driven by the Fed policy, or perceptions of Fed policy, or changes in Fed policy. So that was always good. Everything's up this year. Australia's done quite well. The rest of the world's up 20%, so is Australia. So it's pretty much line ball with most of the rest of the world. It's been good. Asian markets have been poor, particularly East Asia, with the trade war fear. So China and East Asia are particularly poor, but they're still up sort of half a dozen or so percent. But most developed markets are up 20-25%, and Australia's with the pack there. The banks did quite well, given the dens of thieves and should be all closed down. The banks did quite well. 3 things: Morrison re-election, the Fed, the RBA's rate cuts ×3, and the APRA loosening its credit rules. Those 3 things helped the turnaround in housing, which we saw, which flowed through the banks. So the banks are doing quite well. Banks are up to 6-18%. The Westpac's underwater. The ANZ and NAB are up 1-2% maybe. So that's actually been, they're positive. I've been bearish on banks for years, for 3 or 4 years. I think 5 years ago in 2015. They're dogs. There's no reason to loan a bank. They had a fantastic run for 30 years in the deregulation era. That's gone. We're now facing a different 30 years for banks, so I wouldn't be holding banks. Miners did quite well. Iron ore, just top luck of 1,000 commodities in the world. We have iron ore, which is the mine that drives the big miners, BHP, Rio, Fortescue, etc. There was a Vale mine closure in December, January. That closed the mine. It took out 1 million tonnes of iron ore. Iron ore price doubled in the next 6 months this year. It's come back a bit. That fed straight to Rio and BHP and Fortescue. Pure one-off, pure luck. Happened to be the commodity we have. It's pure luck. So those 3 stocks lifted the market. Healthcare stocks have done well. They've ridden the healthcare boom. Healthcare boom's been very, very good globally for the last 3 or 4 years. It's been flat this year relative to the previous couple of years. CSL, all the guys you mentioned, the CSL, Resmith, Copley, Fisher and Paykel, they've all done very well. But they've ridden the whole healthcare boom quite well. So the entire stock market has done pretty much average for the rest of the world. They've got well, nothing special. Had a bad year last year, bounced back this year. So the 2 years together make a pretty average 2 years. The big surprises were the banks. Just one off fortuitous change in the bank with Morrison re-election, which is unpredicted. RBA rate cuts, which is unpredicted, and the APRA easings, turnaround housing, and the iron ore closure in Vale in Brazil. Just pure luck.
Okay, so with that in mind, I just need to also put into proceedings a disclaimer. We do this often at AIA. I did admit, and I just want to inject that now. So please, what we're giving out today is commentary only. It's not advice. So, and again, if you pick up any snippet of information tonight, you do so on your own behest. And if you're not sure, please take out professional financial advice. I don't think any of us are stepping up and being financial advisors tonight.
The comment on banks. There's a point where banks become cheap. It's probably about half the share price they are now, but there's no question of picking timely. So make your own decisions. See your own provider, etc. Yes.
Sure. So moving on, the winners of 2019. This is a list that Henry prepared for me. It's quite astounding set of numbers here when you look at it, and I hope for those of you in the audience you've been the benefit of holders of some of these stocks. Henry, were there any deficiencies? Was there anybody that should have been on this list that didn't make it? Not so much through luck or good luck or whatever,
Most of the ones I am.
but more so that really, with a bit of better management could have been there or should have been there?
Not really. I guess one of the features this year is that some of those are relatively big stocks, and you don't usually get massive gains in the big stocks. Things like Magellan, that's been 122% Magellan. That's in theory just that a fund manager obviously has got leverage to the market. But you compare that to a stock like Vita Medical or even Polynovo, which I know some of you have got, Andrew. You know, it's interesting that there are some big stocks, and even Silver Lake. You know, you wouldn't have imagined that a gold stock would have made it into that list this year, because gold has had a pretty much of a rocky ride at times this year, at times good and at times bad. So it is quite a diverse list. I guess the one thing that does stick out there is they are life sciences. There is a lot of life science businesses or healthcare business. Vita, Polynovo, they do a skin product for burns and trauma victims. Nanosonics, another life science business, Pro Medicus. So there are a number of those there that which has been a pretty good sector this year, I have to say, as you can see by those results.
Ashley, any companies there that are not there that you really believed, you know, were going to be in your top performers for this year?
No, it's a good list. 100% plus come out. The list is pretty good. You look at Fortescue, which is the iron ore lucky shot. Silver Lake Gold. Gold's done. It's drifted up, you know, 5 to 10% US dollars, but the US dollars, $8 fallen 15% in the last 2 years. So it's actually done. And they're very highly leveraged, operational leverage and financial leverage. So when gold does half well, gold stocks go through the roof.
Fair enough.
Same with Magellan. It's got operational leverage and financial leverage. So when the share market comes 20%, that's always going to double. You know, halved last year, doubled this year, big deal. So most of those are leveraged, and the other ones are just biotechs, and there's 200 listed biotechs, 4 of which make money, so it's just purely, it's just a casino.
I guess, is the statement then that any market would have made money this year on the market?
Anybody with index fund made 20%, 25%, so it's pretty good.
It's not bad.
Well, and even, you know, what you would consider mug stocks, Woolies, Coles, and Wesfarmers, consumer staple stocks have all done extraordinarily well this year for very little, not that much risk, and there's stocks that we all can understand. You can walk into your Woolies or your Coles or whatever. They're easy to understand. Some of these stocks, you know, you'd never understand in a million years. But you know, it's amazing how boring has become the new black this year in some respects. And they've just been even CSL. Although it's, you know, it is a high-tech stock in some ways, it's almost un-Australian not to own it. I used to keep saying that on Sky TV until I was blue in the face, and it's been an absolute screamer. And it will undoubtedly go to $300 because that's where everyone seems to want it to go, so that we can all pop champagne corks. That'll probably be the end of it. But it has been the year of boring stocks doing pretty well.
Okay, so
Woolies and Coles, they're retailers, and retailers gone nowhere for a year, and it's looking like going nowhere next year, but the share prices are done well.
Yeah, Harvey Norman, JB Hi-Fi, same deal.
And I'll get to that a little bit later on in the discussion, because I actually have some questions for you both in that regard about, you know, what's actually occurring and what might occur for next year. So let's look at the losers of 2019.
Just came up.
It just came up. So again, when we look at this list, Ashley, do you see any company that's not there that possibly should have been?
Well, most of those have a story, and they're one-off. I don't know much about Speedcast, but you look at New Hope, which is coal, Whitehaven Coal, GA Education with problems, Blackmore's with the China trade. Most of those are particular stories that something went wrong.
Right.
They're not systemic things.
Okay, so if they've gone wrong, but what I'm asking you though, if you look at this list of losers, are these potential really good value buys then for 2020? Because they've struck a bit of bad luck, you know, with Blackmore's. You know, is there something that, you know, a good you know, marketing decision at Blackmore's could turn things around, and that could be a great investment for 2020, for example?
Yes, when you look at a company, you've got to identify turnarounds and management problems which are fixable versus structural things like coal is dying, and even if it's not dying, the world thinks it's dying, so they'll sell down coal companies and oil and gas companies only because they think it's bad, they think you better get out. And they'll be hurt with the transition of fossil fuels. So that, even though you might have a view about coal versus fossil fuels, even if you don't believe any of that stuff, you should believe that they will be hurt by big investors dumping them worldwide because they're going to get out. So those are things things that won't be sold in a decade or 100 years, whereas some of those ones are turnarounds and they've probably good management.
Okay, so if you look at this list, are there one or two turnarounds that you think our listeners and viewers should be looking at?
I learned a lesson years and years ago, never talk stocks, because if I say what I own, which I'm happy to do in the old days, people run into me 5 years and say, that's a dog or something. I told it 3 years ago. And I say, why didn't you tell me? And the answer is, well, I'm not in the business of telling you every day what I do. So I can see a couple of turnarounds which are good value, and I can see some systemically challenged companies which won't be on the books.
But we're not going to divulge it for the tape tonight.
Can't do it.
Fair enough. Henry, are you willing to go on tape and say what might be out there for a potential upside for us in the new year?
Yeah, why not?
No strings attached.
That's what I do every day, so I might as well do it this evening. A lot of those stocks, as Ashley says, have got individual problems attached to them, but there are some that have systemic issues as well. And in terms of thematics, Galaxy and Pilbara, very much a lithium business play, and have suffered because of it. You've got Whitehaven and New Hope, obviously in the coal business, but no hope coal, and Rosehaven coal. The stocks like GA Education, I think there are some systemic issues there, some problems in the whole industry, and I think Blackmores is going to struggle still. I don't think they've got it right yet. But the ones that I would look at, I'm still kind of a bit of an EV kind of fan, and when you go to Europe and by virtue of the fact, as some of you read the newsletter know, I had 2 kids that were living in Europe, so I was going there a bit, and you do kind of get the whole electric vehicle story when you go to Europe, but when you come back here, it's not a story. The German car manufacturers have invested absolutely billions and billions of dollars into electric vehicles and making them sexy, and making them as sexy as Tesla. And at some stage, I think the whole lithium thing will happen again. Whether that's next year or the year after, I don't know. But certainly, I think there's potential turnaround for stocks like Galaxy and Pilbara because they have got pretty good resources. St Barbara as well was a former high flyer gold company, which has had some issues too. But again, they could be solved. The rest of them, things like Main Pharma, I think they've got really big issues in the US. And globally, as far as generic drug pricing goes, just getting that down. And we talked about coal. Costa Group has been a bit of a dog, and this year, I guess, it's really hard. Agricultural stocks are really, really tough places to be. In the midst of a drought, in the midst of New South Wales on fire, it's really hard work. Costa has been really hard work with their avocados, with their blueberries. Anybody that reads the newsletter will know that every now and then I wander into Coles and take pictures of blueberry prices and put them in the newsletter because that's my kind of tracker as to how the blueberry market's going, and they just tend to be blueberries everywhere. They were just stacked full, and they were cheap as chips, $2.50 for a punnet of blueberries. And you can tell that this is something that I write about a lot, is using the Mark 1 eyeball to actually do your own research.
Very good point.
And you walk into a Coles and there's 14 tons of blueberries staring you in the face. First, as soon as you walk in, you think, hang on a second, there's a few of these around. Not so good for Costa. So the only ones, as I say, maybe the Galaxies and the Pilbara, but it may not be 2020. It may be a 2021 story.
Okay, thanks for that. Okay, so other world indices have been mentioned, and again, this is a list. Thank you kindly, Henry, for sending these through. So there's been a strong message there throughout the world that the markets have gone up quite strongly, and so I now want to move on to 3 key questions for the panel to consider when you look at these in context. So in this market, we've had roughly a 2% increase in revenues, yet 19% increase in share value. Can it keep going? Ashley?
It can. This boom we've had for 10, nearly 11 years since March 2009, it's actually quite a mild boom. Last month I did a little story that was compared to the last 10, every decade we get a big crash. we've had 10 and 100 years going back to the start of 100 years ago. And you might, I line them all up so you can see the booms and bust on one page. And this boom has been pretty mild by comparison. It's been running up very, very slowly, very steadily. The All Ords, don't forget, just got back to where it was 10 years, 11 years ago. One of the last countries to remake its pre-GFC high. Share as a market, the share All Ords is not overly expensive. Banks and miners are cheap, for good reason. Most other sectors are fairly expensive across the board. Most stocks in most industries, apart from banks and miners, unfortunately banks and miners dominate the index, so it makes it fair value. It's like being one foot in the oven and the other foot in the fridge. On average, okay. There's two extremes. There's the banks and miners, which are cheap, and there's everything else which is expensive. So I suspect markets don't crash because they're expensive or when they're expensive. Every single crash over the last 100 years has occurred where the market is not expensive, including 1929, including 1987. You look at stock by stock, it's actually not expensive. GFC is another example. We've never had a recession in the GFC, it tanked 55%, so recessions are pretty much irrelevant. So the fact that everyone's talked about we won't have a recession doesn't really matter. There's no reason why the market can't jump another 20-25% before it crashes again.
So if we were to...
It will. There's no reason.
But again, if we were to put you into the AIA contest and you were to give us a number, where do you think the All Ords could be? If we're roughly 6,700 or so today, where do you think we'll be in 12 months' time?
I don't predict 12 months out.
That's okay.
I look at everything once a quarter.
Okay.
So give you an example. This time last year, beginning of end of exactly 12 months ago, 11 months ago this year, after Christmas, every quarter we do a review, and I was bullish on the shares globally in Australia, even though the US share market is completely overpriced. So overweight global Aussie shares, as we were post Trump, very bullish on Trump, which is good because it's up 20% in the year past Trump. So I was bullish at the start of this time last year. That doesn't mean I was predicting 12 months out we'll have 10-20%. This time last year, so 2 years ago, beginning of 2018, very bullish. Within a quarter, end of March quarter, end of June quarter, I got bearish and very bearish, so heavily underweighted shares in the middle of 2018. Even though I was bullish at the start of the year, which is good because the market tanked to 15%, in the US 20%, around the world 20-25% late 2018, the big global growth scare. Underweighted through all of that. This time last year, exactly 12 months ago, it became bullish again. Beginning of January, so we overweighted shares again. So even though I was bullish at the start of the year and bullish 12 months later, this time a year ago, that doesn't mean we didn't underweight heavily in the 2018 sell-off. So I wouldn't put any store in the fact that I'm still bullish because in a quarter's time I might become bearish again. Market's going to crash, does every decade-ish. There's a lot of reasons for it to crash, a lot of debt in the world, a lot of mad leaders in the world, a lot of fingers on nuclear buttons in the world, a lot of things can go wrong. So it may well be that we underweight in 1, 2, 3 quarters time heavily again to avoid a sell-off. Last sell-off, 2018, was a very bad quarter. 4 months of sell-offs, down 15%, 20% in the US, but it was very sharp, very short and sharp. GFC was 16 months straight down. The next sell-off probably will be a longer, more sustained sell-off. I remember I was talking to you guys in the Gold Coast AIA with Sylvana and the guys in 2007. I'm normally very bullish. Into 2007 in the Gold Coast, I was very bearish and sell everything. Don't give advice, but this is the time to sell. What happened 3 months later? GFC. Very bullish in March 09, got back into shares again. So I don't tend to take a 1 year, 3 year, 5 year view. I just look at what I look out from my window, see what I'm seeing, but there's a pothole, avoid it.
Okay, so Henry, what's your view on the 2%, 19% differential between revenues and stock value that we've seen in the past 12 months?
Well, we've obviously had some PE expansion throughout the globe. And of course, this time it's different. How many times have we heard that? The overriding thing in my 40 years, I'll beat you a little bit.
Mine's out of date, it's about 38 years.
Yeah. 40 years
I'm not competing on this
playing this game, is that you don't fight the Fed. And the biggest, no matter what the Trumps and no matter what the Borises of this world do, the most important person in finance is the Reserve Bank chief in the US. And as Ashley said, when that whole Fed policy turned on a dime back in, it was almost Christmas Eve coming into New Year, and what have we had since? 20%. We had the last quarter of last year when we were down 20% because the Fed was going to raise rates. That is the most significant factor in finance. Even in the last 40 years, every time the Reserve Bank, the Federal Reserve Bank, is at the heart of a boom or a bust. Okay. You can find its fingerprints probably on any. If you look back at the crash of '87, and I was a young lad of 2 at the time. You can look back at the '87 crash, which I was 25.
Thank you.
And trading on London Stock Exchange, and you can still find the Fed's fingerprints over that. You can find the German interest rate rise, which came out of the blue. Germans are good at that, by the way. They do tend to surprise. So these things, at the end of the day, that's the thing, that's the key. And this week we've got a Federal Reserve meeting for the year. And no matter what you think of Trump and what you think of the trade war, the overriding position of the US economy is it's still going pretty darn well. They've got the lowest unemployment in 50 years. They've got GDP's come off a bit, as you would expect, given the tariffs, etc., and the confidence. And manufacturing's come off, but they've still got inflation starting to creep up, wage growth starting to creep up, and this low unemployment. It is quite possible, and I would say very likely, that the Fed will be on hold. And I suspect at some stage next year, with Trump going bananas and promising the world to be re-elected, and he will be re-elected, without question, I think, the Fed might start talking about, hey, you know what, we might have to tinker with rates that way.
Hold on,
not
just
that way.
Just a moment. That's my next question.
Right.
So, with interest rates being forecast to average at 1.1% per annum for the next 10 years, are we going lower in 2020?
No. Look, interest rates are negative and zero really haven't worked. You've only got to look at Japan. They have been doing this. They are the textbook case of how to not stimulate an economy. They chucked another 128 billion US at their economy the other day to stimulate it. They've got zero interest rates. They've got high saving rates. They've got money coming out of their yin-yang, and they still cannot stimulate their economy with low interest rates. We haven't been. We haven't just started the experiment in Australia. Phil Lowe has been a late convert to the whole let's cut interest rates to zero game. And look what's that doing to the economy. It sends the wrong signals. It tells you that there's a crisis. And I'm not sure there is a crisis unless we talk ourselves into the crisis. It's the supertramp. Crisis, what crisis? We don't have an economic crisis necessarily here unless we actually talk ourselves into it. So I think the rates have generally, around the world, bottomed because it just hasn't worked. The experiment has failed. It's failed in Europe, it's failing in Australia, it's failed in Japan. There needs to be something else.
Okay, Ashley, and your view on interest rates and this question, what do you think for 2020?
We've got Australia and the US, the big ones that drive our markets. Bit of difference. Japan and Europe are declining population, declining workforce, declining total aggregate spending pie. Somebody switched the lights out. Europe died 100 years ago. No one cares. Nice hospital, nice cathedrals and history, but switch the lights off. Forget the pigs. For Northern Europe's population is declining, so it's just retiring, not spending. So they did. So nothing's going to revive those. US, Australia, Canada and New Zealand are the 4 countries that survived all that because we're British colonies as it happens, it turns out. Great immigration, great demographics, far more dynamic economies. So you've got a growing population. So you've got quite different things going on. That's why the Fed raised rates 4 years ago. Raised rates 9 times before, certainly like this year. A lot of pressure from Trump to cut the rate. So I can see, he's got 2 Fed members now who are Trump stooges who are pressuring to cut rates. So I can see the Fed possibly succumbing to the pressure to cut rates, particularly Trump will get even more unpredictable and nasty in the lead up to the election. So I think we felt low the other day in the RBA talked about 2 more rate cuts here, and then QE, why madness, but he's experimenting with it and they're going to start. It'll probably fail because, as you say, it would seem everyone's preparing for sub-depressionary interest rates, which means something's wrong. So everyone's just not buying that fridge, not buying that car, so people are not spending money. So I can see that being self-fulfilling. So in Brexit, in June 2016, British companies stopped spending money. They stopped building factories. They stopped employing people. They said, well, I don't know what to do now because Brexit is on, is it off? So that's been the case for 3.5 years, 4 years. When Trump came to power and started his trade wars April last year, 2018, companies around the world, from Apple down, stopped building factories. They stopped spending money because they never know what Trump will do next day with banning this or banning that. So Australia, same thing. Companies in Australia are not spending money. They're not building factories, they're not building plants, they're not employing people. So the world has basically gone on a moratorium for investment. And that is it's not an instant recession, but that's a slow grind towards a long, long slowdown. And no amount of Fed money printing or QE or zero interest rates will actually stop that.
Okay. Well, that's a good consideration. Again, Henry and I chat about this weekly. We have a radio show and a podcast. Henry's saying no change. I certainly believe that there will be 1, possibly 2 cuts here locally. I certainly agree with the US with regards to the Fed, but here locally, I still believe there will be a couple of drops between now and Easter.
Everything's up, it's fantastic.
We'll wait and see. We'll wait and see.
Yeah. And it's not bearish, it's good news. Rate cuts are good. Everything's up 20% because of the rate cuts. So it's not a bearish thing, it's actually very good.
The interesting thing again though, and we've talked about this a lot in our own shows, is that once these interest rates go so low and people are looking and chasing yield, then this influx of money comes into equities and hence they start going up. And so there are signs there, and certainly the last year has shown us that. We've already alluded to some of this. The final question I've got for you both before we move to the floor is that next year is a pretty important year. In January, we've potentially got a Brexit if Boris wins or has a minority government. Again, Henry put some money on earlier this week. He was telling us on our show. Was it 17-1, wasn't it, Henry?
Yeah, for a Conservative minority.
Okay, interesting odds. It was $1.60,
65
for Boris Johnson victory, $17 on Sportsbet if you go for a Johnson minority government. Pretty good odds. Did you put, how much money did you put on?
I just put $50.
$50, wow, okay. It's not bad if it comes through. But my question to you both now, and Ashley, if you can go first, with regards to the general election in November of next year, is Trump going to hang around, or are we looking at a new number 46 in the White House?
I actually don't exercise my brain on that. I'm not interested in that.
Okay, but do you believe, or would you say yes or no that there is material impact?
I remember when Trump was elected, 9th of November, Wednesday, I was doing a lunch talk in town, and when I got up, the 9th of November, our time is after the close of counting, close of election day, on the 8th, which is election day, 2016. The world was very bearish. They were terrified of Trump winning. He won the polls, and when I got up to speak, the market was up 2%. Clinton was ahead by 14 seats. This was at midday our night, which is about 8 p.m. their night after the election. Market was up a couple of percent. All Ords, everything's bullish. Now, the scary thing is that Australian market always follows US market. The scary thing is when Australians have to do things without being told to do like the US. So the US is closed. Our market was bullish because Clinton was up. So by midday our time, the market was up. All Ords is up 2%. when I sat down 45 minutes later, Trump was up by 30 seats, collected seats, which won, pretty much. And the All Ords was down 4%, so we had a 6% turnaround in the All Ords, from 2% up to 4% down in 1 hour when I was talking. And my talk was about Trump and how, remember the 80s, in the 70s you had inflation, you had Vietnam War, you had Iran, the hostages. America was basically on its knees in the 70s. What it needed was a dumb actor could say positive things for people to say, look, that's good, I'll get up and get a job or do something. So maybe what America needs is a dumb actor called Trump who can get up and say positive things and start stimulating things. Now, when I sat down, I didn't know, I was talking about why Trump would be good. Everything pretty much except one was positive for America, spending, the war, tax cuts, all these things were very positive. The rest of the world was negative. I was bullish, went overweight. That was good because the market was up 20% in the year following that. So I tend to not get too excited with the noise of what's going on. Look at the underlying themes and make a decision when I see it rather than trying to pick who's going to win. I don't really care who wins.
Okay, you don't care. Henry, you've already made a call. You reckon Trump will win?
Yes, I do think Trump will win. You're not a US president if you've only had one term. No one remembers you.
Apart from Carter?
Apart from
Ford?
Yeah, exactly. My case was.
But they have one-term presidents come on.
I know they do, but they don't get remembered in the same way that
Bush Senior?
Bush Senior didn't get the same recognition when Clinton came along and took it from him. So I think for Trump, it's going to be, for him, it'll be a victory lap. With 17 Democrat contenders, it's hard to find one that you could really pin your hat on. Elizabeth Warren is slightly scary. I think that would be scary for the other way that Trump has turned out to be. So I think that he will get in again, and that will be good for the market. At the end of the day, we've never had a president in the US who is so geared to the stock market. He is a creature of capitalism more than any other president we've ever seen, and I think, I think he will be good still for the stock market. I'm not sure he's good for America, but I think he's good for the stock market.
Interesting comments. Okay, at this point in time, I'd now like to open up the floor to any questions you may have of the panellists. Yes, sir.
Assuming the trade deal is done between China and the US, whatever that might look like, what do you think of the sectors in Australia, not the US, the sectors in Australia that will benefit from that? And you might even want to make a prediction on equities, which stocks might benefit from that.
Who wants to take that one?
I think as far as the trade deal or a trade deal or any kind of phase one of a trade deal, something will happen which will try and make both of them look as if they've had a victory, politically look for a victory. But I think at the end of the day that this trade war is a symptom of a bigger war that's going on between the US and China, and it will not be solved by the signing of a little document saying we're going to take more soybeans and pork. That is not, we're still going to be talking about this in 10 years' time. And the fact that the US economy is still going with 3.5% unemployment, they're not even feeling the heat. The other day, China has mandated their state companies to take out all US technology from their companies in the next 3 years. That's not the actions. Neither of these are the actions of two parties that are going to be lovey-dovey again. This is not going to be lovey-dovey. This is the new Cold War. So we're just going to have to get used to it. It's just part and parcel of it. I think for Australia, unfortunately, we have picked a side, obviously. We've tried to not upset our biggest customer for our coal and iron ore and agricultural products, but I think inevitably we have upset them, and I think there's some frosty relations between Canberra and Beijing, and I think that has taken its toll on. We've seen it in Treasury wine estates from time to time. They talk about hold-ups at port. We've seen it with Bellamy's was a classic. They held up the licensing forever, in China, then suddenly they get taken over by a Chinese company. That doesn't sound, so I think there's a lot of games afoot here. If there is a trade-like deal done, I suspect our agricultural stocks will suffer a little bit, because the US will have all that beef, pork stuff that they can then flog to the Chinese, and the Chinese have lost a lot of their pork production due to the swine fever. So I think the winners, if there are any winners, for us, will be the miners, because China will stimulate. We've already seen it with the iron ore price, popped up 5% on hopes that China will stimulate. So I think that's where it is. I don't think our tourism industry is going to do very well over the next few years. For anybody that's been wandering around Sydney today, that's been a really good advert for tourism in Sydney. I mean, where the bloody hell are you? If you were an overseas visitor looking at all the destinations in the world, the cool destinations in the world, and you saw the picture of the Opera House smothered in bushfire smoke, would you go, oh, I want to go there?
It's like Beijing on a good day.
It is. So no, I think that's damaging, and that feeds through to Sydney Airport, to Star Casino, and it also feeds through into the products that we export to China, because Chinese people come here, they go, oh, this is fantastic, it's clean and green, whatever, and we'll take it back to China and we'll import it in suitcases or whatever method. You're going to do that at the moment? That is going to stick with us for a while.
Okay, we've got time for one more question from the floor. Yes, sir.
Thanks. I was just thinking about our reserve bank, and I was thinking, well, they seem to have to function with one hand tied behind their back in terms of, well, trying to stimulate our economy. I mean, they can only tinker with interest rates or QE. What else can they do to help our economy?
Well, I've got every single annual report since 1960 of the Reserve Bank. And on the front page of the annual report, it spells out the 3 goals, and the only 3 goals the Reserve Bank has. Full employment, which is a very Keynesian idea, that 4% employment is full employment, which we almost are. That's the number 1 goal. Number 2 goal is the stability of the currency. Not prices, not inflation, not anything else. So the Reserve Bank's legislated aims, and its only mandate are unemployment, which is done, not through its fault, and the stability of the currency, through intervening to stabilise the currency so it's good for exporters, etc. It's taken on some informal, fuzzy mandate for inflation, which has failed dismally over the last 20 years. It feels a bit lonely when they go to Wyoming every year in August. Phil Owen predecessors go along. The club's all about printing money and building balance sheets, so he's still a bit lonely. So he's trying to do it himself. It's only got one tool, but the Reserve Bank has got. Don't forget, it was also the bank regulator. It's useless if that's all stripped out of it. Even Wapro, who was equally useless. So the Reserve Bank doesn't do much. It sets interest rates here. The banks really have their own interest rate markets. They're wholesale funded out of Europe mainly. So there's only a limited amount of things that the Reserve Bank can do. So again, it's a very limited toolbox. It's only got a couple of tools, and it's done one badly and one half well. You can't expect it to do much.
Henry, do you have anything to add to that?
Not really. I think actually summed it up pretty well. The Reserve Bank has been a little bit sidelined for such a long time. The banks, as Ashley says, get their funding from a lot of different places these days, so it's hard for the RBA to do much. What they can do is there's still a gravitas, there's still an integrity that the Reserve Bank has, so they can talk a tough game. And Phil Lowe and his predecessor can talk a tough game, and they can try and talk the currency down. They've always tried to talk the Aussie dollar down over the years. So I think that's an important part of their arsenal, which they use. And because we attach an importance, and because it's called the Reserve Bank, we attach an importance to it, which is probably far beyond its mandate, which is pretty limited, and its weapons are pretty limited. And given that we live in a world where you need more than one little weapon, I think it is limited, but they can at least talk it, and I think that's a PR kind of exercise. Same way that the Federal Reserve talks a lot, and we've seen a lot more communication from the current Federal Reserve Chief. It used to be in the old days, it was very mysterious. You know, that the Federal Reserve was mysterious. We just had a Volcker died today. You know, and he was 87 crash, and it was all very mysterious. And suddenly all these central banks got together and had these big gab fests, not Jackson Hole in Wyoming kind of gab fest, but actually where they did get together and try and do something, as they did in the GFC.
But you make an interesting point, Henry, and again, I just want to highlight, when you're talking about limited arsenal, the Governor of the Reserve Bank has certainly been quite vocal, wouldn't you agree, since the change of government and with the supposedly deterioration of indicators. They've been asking the government to step in and do things.
Yeah, I mean, it's not just
their role.
It's not really the Reserve Bank's role to do that.
So it's unusual for them to be speaking up at this point, though, wouldn't you think?
It is, but there's an awful lot of things in politics these days that are very unusual. I think that's fair to say when you look around the world.
Incredibly fair to say.
For those of you who haven't, this is a really good tip. For those of you who haven't seen it, there is the last election ad from Boris Johnson is an absolute cracker, which is a parody of the Love Actually, where he's standing on the doorstep for his doing that with the sign. It's not Keira Knightley, but he's standing there and pretending he's a carol singer and he's pulling over the thing, but it's just priceless. And if that will get him over the line, if nothing else, because the UK is still obsessed with Love Actually, especially this time of year.
Yes, they were talking about it today on the radio, in fact.
So it is a very clever ad, I have to say. So do yourselves a favour. I'm sure it's on YouTube.
It's today's tears.
Yeah,
Okay, and I think that's a good segue to wrap up. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like you to please give a round of applause for our two panellists.
Thank you, gentlemen.
And comes the customary gifts of a nice drop.
And happy Christmas, everyone.
And happy Christmas to all. Season's greetings. Who knows what holds out for next year? Please avail yourself. There's still some nibblies and some drinkies to go before the evening is out. And again, thanks so kindly for participating in tonight's panel. We really appreciate it. And please look forward to seeing it on the web and through the AIA website. So that's a wrap. Thank you very kindly.